This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode I chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today is the second part of my conversation with Eric LaRocca, in which we talk about his latest book, the first in the Burnt Sparrow trilogy, We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Eric, his notable works include Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, Everything the Darkness Eats, The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, and You've Lost a Lot of Blood. And his 2025 novels are At Dark I Become Loathsome, which has already been optioned for film by the Walking Dead star Norman Reedus, and Burnt Sparrow, We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, which forms the bulk of today's conversation. So, before I get Eric on the show, a quick advert break.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio. From the host of This is Horror Podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. Their watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. Their Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Eric LaRocca on This is Horror. So we were talking before about releasing this as 3 separate books, but obviously it's a continuous story. I'm wondering though, as it's being released as 3 books, and some people, for whatever reason, they like to read out of order, was that ever a consideration? Do you try to make book 2 and book 3 something that could be read as a standalone or could be enjoyed in that mode, or do you not consider that at all and you're like, look, this is a series, why would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, readers are going to approach this however they're going to approach it, and I respect whatever choice they make, however they want to engage with this kind of art. That being said, I would obviously prefer them to read the books in order, book 1, book 2, book 3. That being said, I mean, there are people that will probably read book 1. They might not come back for book 2. And then there are people that will probably come in to the series a bit late, and they might even mistakenly buy book 2 without having read book 1. Personally, the way I've structured it, the way I've built this narrative, from my vantage point, I feel like any book of the series could be enjoyed as an individual installment. So without getting into too much of like spoiler territory, book 2 takes place 10 years later after the events that occur in 2003 and 2004 in the first book. And then book 3 takes place 10 years on from the second book. So it's not like we're going directly from one event in one book to the other. There is like a lot of space between these narratives, and there's a lot of like breathing room. So that being said, I feel like if someone were not familiar with the first book, if they did pick up the second book, I feel like they would absolutely be able to kind of glean things that occurred in the first book from reading what I've created in the second installment. Um, and there might be some folks out there who maybe are hesitant to read the first book and the second book until the third book comes out, and maybe they want to read all together the series like as just this one giant mammoth book, and I respect that too. I'm really excited, just like switching topics a little bit, like just because I'm really excited. I saw the cover art for book 2 the other day, and it looks so stunning, and it really captures the vibe of the second book, obviously, so well, and really kind of leans into that like almost Edward Gorey type like aesthetic that the first book cover had, and just plays with like similar like shapes and patterns and colors, and it's just really striking. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited for the whole series to be out so that all of the covers and all of like everything just looks so cohesive, because I feel like one of the big things is like one of the big criticisms of the first book is like none of this makes sense, like none of it like kind of is tying together yet, and I get that, I understand the frustration, but I also like y'all need to just let me cook and like let me create and let me do my thing, and I promise it will be well worth the wait once the entire series, like once everything comes together.
So I wonder, in fact, with you saying that, for some people it's not quite making sense or they're feeling frustration. Was that another motivator, or at least another bonus, in including nested stories within the story?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I really wanted this book to like bewilder people. I wanted it to be perplexing and maybe even like a little off-putting. I mean, because I'm discussing really unpleasant, unsavory sort of subjects. So I wanted it to be all of those things. I wanted it to be something that like maybe you recoil a little bit when you first encounter it. Maybe you kind of wince when you think about like picking it back up. um, that being said, the stories that are nested inside the main narrative, some of them do come back in later installments, and there's a reason that they're in there. I mean, especially the one that Rupert's mother tells him over the tape recorder. I mean, that story is kind of like the heart and soul of the whole series, if I'm being perfectly honest, without getting into too spoilery territory. The whole book is really about thresholds and how life is like a series of thresholds where once you cross over, once you cross the line and do something, step over into this other, plane of whatever existence, whatever you want to call it. There's no going back. There's no going back from some of the things that people do in this town and these books. So the book is really about like limits, and what are your limits? What are you capable of doing? What is in your heart to motivate you? What's a threshold that maybe you wouldn't cross, but maybe you would if you were in like certain circumstances? I really wanted to like hammer home the notion of like thresholds and how fundamental they are to like humanity. And especially like transgressive fiction, I feel like transgressive fiction is really about crossing thresholds and going beyond the limits of what is like acceptable. But in a weird way, when we go beyond those limits and when we like take readers along with us for the journey, in some way, in some like perverted way, we kind of like mutate the line of like respectability of how we perceive certain things. Like Samuel R. Delany said that about transgressive fiction, especially, like it moves the line of respectability. He wrote a really controversial book called Hog many, many years ago. And he argued that transgressive fiction kind of like puts people, moves the needle when it comes to like what is acceptable, what is permissible in like printed fiction. You know, if you're willing to accept this, maybe you can go a little further, and then go further from there, and then go further from there. So it's really fascinating to listen to him, and I definitely agree with what he's saying.
Well, I said at the start that this may be your most taboo of all your books, and I think it's almost as if with each release you do try to push that threshold a little bit further. So it's not even just within this single book, but this is kind of the trajectory of your career. Now, Titan Books are not known for releasing this type of fiction. I mean, they release phenomenal fiction. They always release very good and thoughtful stories, but in terms of transgressive fiction that pushes taboo, that smashes through boundaries, I mean, we mentioned The Brothers. We've got themes of imprisonment. We've got A Christmas Day Massacre. Forbidden love is peppered throughout not only this book, but the vast majority of what it is you do.
Mm.
Was there any pushback? I mean, it almost seems crazy for an editor to push back against a transgressive author being transgressive, but at the same time, you're pushing pretty hard against these limits. So, I mean, were there any things where the editors were like, "This is too much. We need to tone it down"? As I'm
Yeah.
saying that, I'm reminded of in the acknowledgements you mentioned a couple of authors. If I'm getting it right, I think it might have been Rachel Harrison and Clay McLeod Chapman who
Yes.
actually encouraged you to go further. So I want to talk about everything within that area, the areas of knowing when to go further, when to perhaps rein it in, how the editors felt, how Clay and Rachel felt, and how you felt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the editing process for the first book in the trilogy was um, seamless, but in a way it was a little bit fraught because there were elements that were pushing those boundaries and breaking taboos and pushing past certain thresholds. So there's scene in particular in the book that my editor, or both of my editors rather, because Kath and George were working on the first book together, they really were quite hesitant about one scene in particular, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it's probably the scene you can imagine involving the bathtub. And they were really hesitant about that scene, and they really wanted to make it more like implied as opposed to so explicit. That being said, I read their notes and I thought about it for a little while, and it's so funny you brought up Jack Ketchum earlier because I referenced Jack Ketchum's work in my letter to them when I responded about how I wanted to keep the scene as is, and I wanted this graphic brutality on full display because of books that inspired me, like Off Season, like The Girl Next Door. And it's so funny because a very prominent YouTube reviewer that I really appreciate and love watching his material thought that the book, Burnt Sparrow Book 1, reminded him so much of The Girl Next Door and The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. He was like, it's like a combo of both of those stories. But that being said, I approached my editor. I said, I really want to keep the brutality, the carnage, the unpleasantness on full display. And I kind of laid out my case and how I wanted to approach it. And there were things that I did pull away from a little bit, like, some things that I did accentuate. I don't want to get into too spoiler territory, but there were certain compromises that I made that in that scene that are now in the final book that I felt comfortable making those compromises as long as I could keep like the emphasis and the heart and soul of why I wanted that scene to remain in there. And it's such an important scene in the book of what Rupert witnesses happening in his own home. So it was difficult to convince them at first, but once I kind of laid out my argument and articulated my thoughts eloquently as I could, they agreed that it was the best thing to keep the scene in and to maybe take out like a few words here and there, a few sentences, but yeah, the editing process was relatively easy despite that one little blip. But it really was like Rachel and Clay who read early drafts of the book and really encouraged me to be like more unhinged and kind of lean into my strengths as a writer, which is writing about human cruelty and human barbarity. And I think that's what's really important, is to like have people in your corner that are not necessarily yes men. Like, I don't consider Rachel and Clay to be like yes men, but they know what my strengths are as a writer. They know what brings me joy when I'm creating a story. And they want to see me flourish and they want to see me thrive. So it was such a special honor to have them read early copies of the book and give me their honest feedback. And it was helpful having that sort of feedback go into my editor and say, well, this is what Rachel and Clay thought of this scene. It's funny because there were elements in the second book that I submitted, like a draft. I submitted a draft a while ago, and well, obviously we don't have to talk too in depth about this because I'm sure, like I said, I'll be back for the second book. But there were elements in the second book that were just like too graphic and too obscene to be published, and I definitely had to like scale back and rethink how I wanted to present the story. So I find myself kind of going into like a certain direction as I keep moving forward in the trilogy and in this series of books. I find myself going to like darker and more unpleasant places. And I find Kath and George kind of pulling me out of that, not in a bad way, but in a way of like, once you have a character commit a certain act and do a certain thing, you lose all sympathy for them. And I don't necessarily need my characters to be sympathetic. So maybe sympathy isn't the right word, but you lose like all interest in reading about this character if they commit something so egregious. So that's really what I care about when I'm writing fiction. Like, I want the character to be compelling. I don't care if he or she is likable. I don't really care about whether or not like a reader likes a character, because most people are just like insufferable anyway. So I feel like characters, a flawed character is more compelling and more interesting to me than someone who has everything and has their whole life together and is like a decent, upstanding person. I'm much more interested in like flawed, maybe even like a little problematic characters. I mean, I grew up reading theater plays written by like Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee. I mean, these are like very, very flawed characters. I mean, Blanche in A Streetcar Named Desire is, for all intents and purposes, a pedophile. She's not a good moral, doesn't really have a good moral center in her. And that play is like so beloved and so respected and cherished. So all that to say, I found the editing process for this book in particular, We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. It was a rewarding process, but it was like an arduous process in a lot of ways. It was easy to navigate, but it did take a little bit to like get it right. And the second book has like the same sort of not issues, but the same sort of process has happened with going back and forth. Like, is this too much? Is it crossing a line? And you explained it before. Like, Titan really isn't known for putting out deeply, unapologetically transgressive work. They're more. I feel like they're more. Lately, they're more interested in publishing like gothic sort of fiction. They're really interested in like obviously queer voices, especially marginalized voices. But I see a lot of like overtly gothic fiction coming out from them. So it's interesting to be one of the few authors on their roster that's like publishing extreme transgressive sort of queer fiction.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to hear that perhaps while writing book one that you did hold back a little bit, particularly knowing with, the book that you put out with Clash, Everything the Darkness Eats, that you had a moment where you regretted not going far enough, and then you re-released the version that was truer to what you wanted to achieve. So, I mean, I'm wondering, and it might even be impossible to know really, but can you pinpoint why it was that you initially held back? I mean, have we kind of answered the question? Is it because Titans simply are not known for this, and so there was reluctance on that part until they gave you the permission to be unapologetically you?
I think because it was the first book in what would be a series, I found myself second guessing myself quite a bit. And I didn't want to go right out of the gate with all of this like depravity and brutality and everything so explicit. And then I didn't want to like start at like 11 and have nowhere to go from there. Even though like a lot of the material I cover in this book, like you've said, like it's very taboo and it's very much like some of the most like unpleasant material I've written about in my career so far. That being said, like I didn't want to start at like 100 and have nowhere to like progress to. So I did find myself like easing back and not going as full throttle as maybe I wanted to initially. And I think that served me well a little bit with this first book because knowing me, I probably could have gone like even further. And that says a lot because I feel like the book does go to some very unsavory places and just really awful, awful places. But that leads me to like the second book, which went completely off the rails with just like the level of like depravity and horribleness that I was writing about, to the point where it was like the editors coming to me and saying like, we really need to like rein this in because people are going to lose all interest in this series if you have a character doing doing these acts to another character. And it becomes like an interesting dance, like between editor and author, and what is a line that you can cross, what can't you cross. I don't know. I think I do second guess myself quite a bit when it comes to like putting out this sort of transgressive material, because in a lot of ways, like, I started my writing career in the indie space where we're not thinking much about like Barnes and Noble and Waterstones. Are they going to stock this book? But now I'm thinking about like the bigger corporations, and I'm thinking about like Penguin Random House, them distributing the book. I'm thinking about with Wretch, Simon and Schuster distributing the book. And I don't want to say that it's stifled my creativity when it comes to like writing disturbing, transgressive material, but it has made me be more reflective, and it's made me be more thoughtful about what I write about, how I convey certain ideas, certain things. And I ask myself, like, is this necessary? Is this totally necessary for what I want to articulate in this scene, in this story? It's kind of, it's made me slow down my writing process and really forced me to kind of ask myself, how do I want to convey this, and how do I want others to perceive the story that I'm trying to tell?
And for those who really enjoy just the utter fearlessness and the extremity, I mean, throughout this conversation, you have been really previewing and psyching people up for book 2, because it's like, look, if you think book 1 is extreme, you ain't seen nothing yet. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see where you go, and then to, having had this conversation, to, as I'm reading, kind of guess where are the places where you initially went further and had to kind of rein it in.
Yeah, that first draft of the second book it'll never see the light of day, just because it was so much. And I was thinking about it the other day, like, my editors were totally right. Like, once you have a character commit a certain act, I mean, it's the most unforgivable act a person can do. Um, you, I mean, the listeners can probably imagine what I'm referencing, what I'm talking about. And there are many things to pick from, but it's one thing in particular that I was writing about. Um, you can't come back from that, and you can't expect a reader to really care or be interested in a certain character after they've committed something so just vile. Um, and it's a delicate balance between shocking, and then like, it's a delicate balance between like challenging a reader and just like completely and utterly like obliterating them and like violating them in a weird way. It's definitely it's difficult to write this kind of material and have it resonate with people, and but do so like in an effective way, but also like cater to the larger corporations that are like stocking the book in the bookstores. Like, it's made me like restructure my whole thinking of how I approach my art, which I don't know. It's, on one hand, like, maybe it is a detriment, but on the other hand, like, this is my livelihood now, and this is how I make a living. Um, so I definitely don't want people to think I'm like a sellout or anything, because I am writing like very raw and transgressive fiction. I think I am, at least. Um, but I think it's important. I think, honestly, when I reflect on it, I do think it's important to have people in your corner that aren't just yesing you to death, and aren't just saying like, this is amazing, put it out, see how people react to it, shock people, challenge people, violate, your readers, and with this kind of depraved material. I think it's important to have editors in your corner who do ask you to rein it in and to cut back on some of the more extravagantly grotesque elements in the story. I think maybe it makes you like a little bit more marketable. I think maybe that's my problem, is just I'm not writing like very marketable fiction. And it's a point when it's like there's friction between the idea of like art and like commerce, and putting out material that like you're expecting people to actually buy. I think the two can coexist, but it is like it's difficult to navigate that dichotomy,
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that we've had before, and this is a topic that I think about an awful lot, art versus commerce. And, for me at the moment, because, the commerce on a mainstream level is not quite there yet. I think when you're not at that level in terms of like massive publishers, then you might as well just 100% commit to the art and to your authenticity, because I think that's probably how you initially find the audience.
Mhm.
Then when you've got the big marketing forces, then you can look at, right, what's the balance to have both of these coexist, to be completely authentic but to almost market what should be the unmarketable. But I guess my fear, and from watching how other people kind of approach it, I think if you start to rein it in before you've got the commerce, you might never get the commerce, because the way that you will be noticed and respected and get your audience is through being authentically yourself, to begin with, which of course is not to say that you're not then not authentically yourself. It's just a different mode. But if you're self-censoring before you've got the big publisher or you've got the agent or the marketer, well, now you're second guessing. So it's like you actually need this other person to tell you. You can't be the one inventing someone telling you who doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, it's difficult to navigate that, but I think I don't know. I think it's important for authors to obviously be authentic, and because readers can tell when you're phoning something in or when you're not being completely you. Um, if you are in the indie space and you're not, with a big publisher, I feel like that's the perfect opportunity to really go hard and be totally who you are. And then once you get the bigger publisher, you're able to like refine it more. You're able to like distill your vision. You're able to edit, to hopefully self edit yourself, um, and reach a point where you're creating art, but you're also like shaking hands with that idea of like commerce, art and commerce existing together. And I shouldn't say it like I feel like I'm not creating authentic. I feel like this is coming across like I think I'm not being authentic to myself anymore, which I don't believe that at all. Like I think Burnt Sparrow book 1 is very much rooted in my soul, and it's the book that I wanted to write. I think what happens is so much of my short fiction was obviously very depraved and debauched. Uh, but when I started graduating to larger, like more lengthier works, the editing process became different because I was already such like a master of working on short fiction and short novellas. The editing like working with editors was so easy because there wasn't that much work to be done on the projects anyway. But now that I'm working on like 70,000 plus word novels, the editing, like there's more to edit, there's more to do, there's a much bigger conversation to be had. So I think it just, I don't know, it's I'm glad that I put this book out the way that I did, because honestly, I feel like the changes, the edits that I made, the everything I did to like make it the best book that I could, I feel like Kath and George did everything they could to really help me and to honor the vision. And the same for book 2 and what eventually will be book 3. I'm sure the same will happen with book 3. Um, it just it's a process, like it's such a process, and once you have like a bigger publisher, it becomes, you have to consider other variables. It's not just you and like one person running like a micro press in wherever. uh it's you, and then you have like a whole marketing team, you have like publicity to think about, you have a sales department to think about, and there are just so many more variables at play. Um, so it's a much more collaborative process. It's not just me sitting in my room writing and then going on Ingram Spark and releasing the book as a self-published book, which is totally valid. I think, self-publishing is so valid and is so important, but it's just a different process than self-publishing. You don't have, there's other things to consider when you're working with like a larger publisher. But that being said, you do get more support and more, you just get a different machine working on the book than you do with like a smaller indie press or even like self-publishing. When you're self-publishing or working with like a small press, it's like you're doing everything yourself pretty much. So when a big publisher takes a risk on you and gives you an advance and wants to send you on tour and do events for you, like you really do have to collaborate with them and be somewhat agreeable to the changes they suggest.
And as you know by now, I mean, at This Is Horror, we're very interested in writing process and story mechanics. So, I mean, I'm wondering, pre-draft 1, what did the planning process look like? And how much did you have mapped out before you started writing? And I mean, this is a unique situation because normally I'd be talking about, the specific book. But I know actually, you had 3 books. This was 1 volume and now it's been split into 3. So how meticulously was this planned going in? And kind of linked to that, I mean, when you have the moments of depravity and transgression, for want of better phrasing, how much of that is planned out and how much is kind of intuitive, in the moment creation?
I'm glad you said intuitive, because I feel like a lot of my artistic process is a lot of like intuition. And I know like one of my favorite filmmakers was David Lynch, and he operated a lot with intuition. I remember watching like a lot of interviews with him where he was talking about like an artist's intuition is their greatest gift, their greatest strength, because it's like that sort of feeling of knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I feel like I kind of operate with that same, I'm not saying I'm like on David Lynch's level, but I definitely operate with that same sort of thinking. Like it is intuition based and it is like a vibe, an aesthetic, whatever I want it to be. It's sitting down and like curating those moments and creating them, and also honoring the way that they like come out of you, the way they like pour out of you. um I'm a very quick writer. And for me, like, books really do just, like, in a lot of ways, when I'm cooking, when I'm really cooking well, like, they pour out of me. A draft is pretty quick. Like, a first draft is pretty simple for me to, like, write. But then it comes back to, like, editing, and, like, revision, rewriting, like, with my editors. But so much of that first draft is intuition based, and it is like, what's the vibe of this scene? What's going to work on the page? What is a reader going to, like, expect? What's going to surprise them? What's going to shock them? That's what's exciting to me as, like, a creator, as an artist, is creating and, like, curating those really palpable, rich moments. So starting the series, beginning with this first book, I had obviously everything mapped out. I had a full outline. I had a full, like, proposal that I sent to Titan that I still have somewhere, like, on my hard drive of my computer. But because of all of the kind of detours I took along the way, and especially the detours I took in book 2 and how things sort of threaded together. I mean, the proposal I sent, the outline I worked on is very different from what is going to be published. And I think it's important to have that outline. I think it's important to have that proposal in written form, so, like, you have a compass, you know where you want to go, but you can go off trail and you can go off path if you want to, if you need to. And I needed to. Like, I felt like I really desperately needed to just go off into, like, uncharted territory and see what I could find. And I could always come back to the path if I really wanted to, because I had that blueprint with me all along. But I feel like the outline, like, almost gives you the confidence, at least it gives me the confidence, to be intuitive and to have those organic moments of, like, well, what if I did this instead? What if I went down this path instead? Um, it just gives me more of those opportunities to, like, surprise myself, which is so important. I feel like, when you're writing something and it's just, like, very formulaic and it's just, like, you're going through the motions, it's just not exciting for you as an author, and it's definitely not going to be exciting for you for the reader. But when you're able to, like, surprise yourself and take a change in the direction of whatever narrative you're telling, and you surprise yourself, you shock your system. I feel like that's when you're like, really cooking with gas. I feel like that's when you're, like, really leaning into, like, your storytelling, like, your chops, like, what you're capable of doing, what you're capable of how you're able to, like, perform. Because all of this really is like a performance. Writing really is like a kind of performance art. And it can be unexpected, and it can be messy and, like, problematic. But for me, it's really important to have that blueprint early on, so that way I just have, like, it to kind of clutch if I take a turn and it's the wrong turn and I'm met with, like, a dead end. It's important for me to have that backup plan just in case. But like I said, the proposal, the outline for this series is so vastly different than what is going to be published. And I'm really glad that it's different, because it's so much better, I think.
And it's an interesting situation to be in, because you presumably sold the free books, on the basis of the proposal, but then what you turned in is vastly different. Now, I believe that in the publishing and the fiction book world, that there is certainly a lot more flexibility than, let's say, in filmmaking. I think if you had your treatment, and then the script was vastly different, there could be a problem. But what was the response from Titan? You've sold it on the proposal, then you've turned something in. It's different. Was there any concern or comment, or because the vision was better realized, was it just, well, this is a great story?
Yeah, it definitely was like, I think it maybe was surprising for my editors when they got the first draft of like the first book and then the second book, especially because it really deviated in the second book. But they were totally game, and they were so like appreciative and supportive of the changes, the edits that I made to the story, the actual narrative. And I think that's what it comes down to, is like, if you're telling a compelling, dynamic narrative, you can kind of get away with really anything. And I think I've built like a level of trust and uh, closeness with my editors at Titan, that they really do trust me, and they do think like, okay, Eric's like, we know Eric is good for this. Like, we know he's going to deliver something that's going to be like of quality. We know it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be like depraved and weird and messed up. So yeah, there was never any pushback on like, oh, this is so different than the outline. There was more pushback on like certain scenes and certain acts performed by certain characters, and just like, do we really need to go there? And also, they made valid points where it's like, if you start, like I said before, if you start at like 11, you have nowhere else to go. It's just impossible for you to keep momentum building and building and building if you start at the utmost depraved thing you can think of. It's important to have the pressure building slowly, and I think I laid the groundwork for it. At least I hope I did in the first book of this trilogy.
And I believe that you've said before that your boyfriend Ali reads these books. He reads all of your books. Firstly, is that right?
Yes, he does.
Okay, so I'm wondering, I mean, as your career has perhaps stretched into further and further depths of depravity, I mean, what kind of initial reaction are you getting from Ali? And I wondered, just purely as a curiosity and out of fun, which book or which story is Ali's favorite?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure what his favorite is. I honestly think he really liked We're Always Tender with Our Dead, the one that we're talking about. He really did like it. He really liked At Dark I Become Loathsome. He thought that was like very depressing, though, and very bleak, which it is. And so is We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. He read Wretch recently and really loved that. Yeah, it's difficult for him because he's not really interested in horror, and uh, he finds a lot of like horror films that I watch, that I make him watch. He finds them like sad in a lot of ways. Like, he finds them um like people hurting one another. He gets really like emotional about that, and um it's not that he can't separate that it's fiction. It's just, it affects him differently. Um, so that, with that in mind, like, I do try to watch a lot of the films that I like to watch, like when he's at work or when he's like out of the house, just because like I don't want to like upset him too much. But it's interesting because my work, I feel like, has gotten darker over the years, and like more nihilistic and more like just bleaker. It's gotten so much more bleak, and it's so fascinating because my like private life has gotten so much more like brighter and so much more like lovelier and more wonderful as we've like navigated our relationship and live together now in Boston and just enjoy each other's company and have like really quiet days together and spend our mornings or evenings just like reading our separate books, or watching, movies that we both agree on, or watching TV shows that we both like. It's just interesting to me now that I really think about it, now that I've said it out loud, that my work has gotten so much more overtly explicit and overtly like unpleasant, despite the fact that like my life at home is so like banal, but banal is not the right word. Like it's just like pleasant, it's just like a pleasant sort of life. And I love that.
Yeah, I find that sometimes there's a contrast between my fiction and my private life. I mean, not always, but quite often. So when I was going through, the worst period of my life with the divorce and the custody battle and being separated from my daughter for a number of years, I then wrote Daddy's Boy, the dark comedy, which is the most fun and I would say the lightest thing I've ever done. So
Yeah.
it, yeah, and then it's equally gone the other way when things are really pleasant. I just write the most fucked up, messed up fiction. And
I feel like it gives us like the freedom to be as dark and as grotesque as we want to be, like that level, like having like a solid home base and having like your shit together really empowers you to write like messy, complicated, problematic, weird stuff. I feel like if I didn't have my life together, I mean, I feel like it's not completely together, but that's neither here nor there. Um, I feel like if I didn't have such a solid home base with like Ali and like my parents, I feel like if I didn't have all that, it would be really difficult for me to write the material that I do write. I'm sure I would still do it because I'm very driven and I'm very motivated to create. But it's nicer when like the circumstances surrounding you are just like so much more pleasant than what you're writing about.
right, and I mentioned this off air, and so this will definitely be the first time it's been mentioned in a podcast because this is the first podcast I've recorded since my son was born. So, I mean, he was literally born 9 days ago. So some people are probably thinking, what the fuck are you doing recording a podcast? But look, this is how it goes. Sleep deprivation, overwork or not. Here I am. But I was, of course, reading We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, just as he had been born. And there was such a juxtaposition, and almost I felt like a wrongness or I'm doing something forbidden here, because as people who are familiar with your work will not be shocked to hear there are themes of child abuse. There are very messed up things happening to toddlers and such. And it was such a wild contrast. It's like I'm looking after a newborn and I'm reading this.
You're reading a book by Eric LaRocca.
And I feel like I feel like I shouldn't be doing this, but yet these two elements of my life are coexisting, and I don't know, it was just fascinating that the timing worked out, that he's been born and I'm reading Burnt Sparrow, and that those things were never meant to happen. I mean, I said to you, he was born just under a month earlier. So the schedule was Burnt Sparrow was meant to have been read.
Yeah.
And then he was born later.
Wow.
And life is unexpected and delivers gifts like reading Burnt Sparrow while tending to a newborn.
That's like the perfect way to experience the book, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I said before that you never read the same book twice. It depends on the seasons in your life and where you're at. And to be experiencing moments of it, because I started it before he was born, and then finished it during. But to be exposed to such raw material in this sleep deprived, almost hallucinatory state,
Yeah,
sometimes reading with the soundtrack of an actual newborn crying was such a unique
I bet.
and jarring experience. And of course there's no real question attached to that, because what the fuck am I gonna say? When you were writing this, did you expect people to be looking after a newborn? How did you pack that into the writing process? No,
I'm
it
glad it
didn't.
worked out that way.
Yeah, but just what what a treat. And so that the way it will work with your next one, Wretch, is I suppose that I'll have what a kind of 4 or 5 month old one for that. So we'll see how reading Wretch with a 4 month old, your facial expression is saying, "Oh boy."
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
stuff in there that's about that age group. So
Here
I
we
don't I
go.
don't know. I don't know how that's gonna go.
But I mean, we've alluded to Wretch, and of course, we did say at the start of the conversation, Chuck Palahniuk giving you a blurb for it. You said that throughout your career, a lot of it has been trying to get Chuck's attention. Well, that begs the question: how did this get into Chuck's hands? How did you finally get his attention?
My Chuck and I have the same editor at Simon and Schuster, so that's how. He works with Tim, who is my editor at Saga, and I told Tim, like, man, I am just like the biggest fan of Chuck Palahniuk. Like, I would love to get a book to him, like, especially Wretch, because I feel like I was really thinking about him a lot during like the writing process of the book. I was thinking a lot about him. I was thinking a lot about Clive Barker, and I was really thinking a lot about like Dennis Cooper while writing Wretch. So Tim very graciously sent a copy to Chuck, and it just worked out that we caught him at the right moment, the right time frame, and he was able to read it and give a really stellar endorsement for it. Um, but like I said earlier, I'm just like so grateful and um, so appreciative for Chuck. I mean, he's kind of known for being this like very generous, warm person, and I've never met him, but I imagine he's all those things and also like so much more.
And at this point, you've had interactions with and blurbs from a number of people who, you greatly admire, and you were reading even before you were really writing, and, were influences from such a formative age and a formative period in your creative career. Well, that begs the question at this point: who is it that you'd most like to get a blurb from or get their attention? Who's next on the Eric LaRocca hit list?
I mean, I feel like you already know it's Clive Barker.
There you
Yeah.
go.
No, Clive Barker is number one for me. I love him so much. And I've read so many of his books. I've read so many of his short stories, and his writing really shaped me in a lot of ways and defined me and defined my like imagination and how I wanted to like communicate my own darkness with the world. And I think about him daily. Like, it's unhealthy the amount of the amount of times I think about him. But I just look at him like a beacon of light and of hope. His fiction just means the world to me. That being said, like, I don't. I was kind of joking when I was saying, like, like, I've spent my whole career trying to get this person's attention. Like, I spend my career like writing and creating and hoping that it resonates with readers, and that's what I want most of all. But it is very rewarding and it is very gratifying when, like, a legend like Chuck Palahniuk or maybe Clive Barker one day, when they interact with something that you've written, some of the art that you've created, and they're like, oh, this speaks to me too. Like, it's just that special moment between two creators, uh that's just like, it's so rewarding when you pass your art that was inspired by this one person and they kind of validate it for you. There's nothing quite like it.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time together, but I mean, the next time we get together, it will probably be to discuss Wretch. So, on that basis, I'd love it if you could almost give our listeners and viewers a bit of a teaser in terms of what to expect. And, you can take that as broadly as you like. If you want to talk about, well, here's a text that it's in conversation with. If you want to tell us, which of your other books it might be most for fans of, or if you just simply want to give us a few lines, but what can you tell us to whet our appetite for Wretch and to ensure that people pre-order it as soon as that is available?
Wretch for me feels in a lot of ways like a rebirth and like a reset. Um, I am obviously kind of well known for like the transgressive and like the extreme and the depravity and the brutality, but Wretch operates kind of in a different space. When Chuck Palahniuk read the book, he mentioned a literary novel called A Single Man by Isherwood. And it's a very famous queer novel about a man who loses his husband and his decision to commit suicide and his life over the course of 24 hours. Like, the book sort of chronicles that. So it's a literary novel. It's not a horror novel at all. And Chuck, the book Wretch, like, really reminded him of this book, called The Single Man. And we're really hoping that the release of Wretch is not only embraced by horror readers, but is embraced by literary readers as well as the horror fans that I've kind of accumulated over the past few years. Um, it's a much more like somber, reflective book. It's much more introspective. It's a first person narrative, following this one man very closely, and his descent into this netherworld of suffering and pain and loneliness. Um, and I actually dedicated the book to Clive Barker, because, like I said, Clive has shaped my whole being in a lot of ways and made me feel empowered and capable of writing horror fiction when I felt so insecure about it, when I felt like it was a dirty word, when I felt like it wasn't something that I should commit my whole existence to. He made everything seem possible. So I really wanted to dedicate the book to him. But there are obviously very graphic body horror elements in the book, but it is a slower story. It's a very slow burn. Um, I kind of like to describe it as like an A24 movie, because it has that vibe. It has that vibe of like, It Only Comes at Night. I think that's the title of the film. It comes, yeah, something like that. It was like from 2017. That film, it has the vibe of like, um, The Witch a little bit. Just those like really bleak, somber films. This book kind of has that same sort of aesthetic and that same sort of like narrative drive. Um, but it does feel like a reset for me in a lot of ways because it's not as like vicious and graphic as my other published works are. It feels a little bit more in line with if you liked The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, that short story that short story collection. If you really enjoyed those stories, this feels like it's much more in conversation with that sort of book. Um, and then as far as like outside books that it might be similar to, um, I mean, there's so many I could think of, so many I could list. I mean, obviously, like Clive Barker's works, like especially his Books of Blood series, those books, The Dumb House by John Burnside, which is a really excellent, um, just disturbing novel. The Devil's Footprints, also by John Burnside. Um, Yeah, no, it's a very, like, calculated and slow, agonizingly slow descent into one man's suffering, and I'm really excited for readers to pick it up and see what it's all about.
Well, I certainly think that the cover art and just the cover presentation in general, it really captures, as you said, that A24
Yeah,
horror vibe. Like, there's part of me that wants to say it looks like the thinking man's horror book, but then there's obviously reluctance because then that sounds disparaging to what are we saying that other horror isn't. But there
yeah,
is something provocative. There's something, in the films that you mentioned. Also, like I would think Hereditary, that kind of vibe to it. Just
yeah.
a slow burn, almost philosophical horror to a point.
It is very philosophical, yeah.
So I can't wait to read that one, and well, I won't have to wait much longer anyway.
Yeah, it's coming up very soon, so March 24th, 2026, so, um, definitely check it out if you're looking for, like, interesting, weird horror.
All right. Well, where can This Is Horror listeners and viewers connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram and Facebook. My Instagram is Eric_LaRocca, and Blue Sky is ericlarocca.bsky.social. And then I'm on Facebook, of course. So yeah, people can connect with me there and follow my transgressions.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Well, I mean, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you and to talk about another book. It feels like just yesterday we were talking about A Dark I Become Loathsome. So it's really special to be able to chat with you and to share my writing with the world. And um, yeah, it's wonderful. I feel really lucky to be able to do this and to have this platform, and I'm so deeply grateful, and I'm always moved whenever I chat with you. I always feel like I see things a little differently after we talk, and I think about my work differently, and I think of myself a little bit more kindly whenever I talk to you. So it's always such a joy.
Well, that is a tremendous compliment. So I thank you so much for that. And yeah, I always look forward to these conversations. I look forward to your books. I know, whatever happens, I know that your book is going to be thought provoking. I know it's going to move me in some way. I know it's going to challenge me. It's probably going to mess me up at some point during the journey, but that's kind of part of the fun and the pleasure. And these feelings of being scared or being uncomfortable, for me, and I think for the vast majority, that's why we got into horror in the first place. So you are doing so many things right, and it's been such a joy to experience your rise from, independent publishing and now to Simon and Schuster, and just seeing people embrace this messed up vision of yours. I love it. And I thank you. So thank you for doing what you do. And thank you for chatting with me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to Eric LaRocca on This Is Horror. Join me again next time when I will be chatting with the man who is ordinarily my co-host, Bob Pastorella, to dive deep into his brand new vampire novel, The Small Hours. Now, if you would like that and every other episode ahead of the crowd, and you want to help me make 2026 the biggest year for This Is Horror podcast yet, please become a podcast patron at patreon.com/This Is Horror. You will also be able to submit questions for each and every guest. Speaking of which, the first guest for 2026 is Dean Koontz as he returns to the show to talk about his forthcoming book, The Friend of the Family. Alright, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
From the host of This Is Horror podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. They're watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. They're Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This Is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
Well, this is the last episode of 2025 for This Is Horror podcast. And I think we really went out on a high. Not only is it always great to chat to Eric LaRocca, but we put out 6 episodes of the podcast in December. Although every month for 2026, we will be putting out more, because going forward into the next year, we're putting out 2 episodes every single week, and we are increasing our presence on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube with a lot more video content. So if you want to get videos with writing tips and quick bursts of inspiration, you've got to follow us at This Is Horror Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I usually put the videos up on TikTok first, but Instagram is our fastest growing social media platform, and YouTube is the only place to see the entire video version of the podcast. So really what I am saying is there are reasons to follow us on each of those platforms at This Is Horror Podcast. And if you like what you see and want to guarantee I do this full time going forward, then support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/This Is Horror. Now, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, or at least alluded to, I am taking off the majority of 2026 from teaching as I look after my newborn son, among other things. Now, this has also presented me with an amazing opportunity to go even harder on This Is Horror podcast. If by the time my year of leave is up, I have enough support on Patreon, then I won't be returning to teaching, and I'll be making This Is Horror podcast my main job. So when I say I would love your support on Patreon, I truly do mean that, because my fate and the fate of the podcast is in many ways in your hands. So if you like what I've been doing for, goodness, nearly 13 years now, and if you are financially able to do so, that being a pretty key caveat, then do go over to patreon.com/thisishorror and give us some support. Alright, on that note, I will see you next time, next year, for a conversation about the small hours with good old Bob Pastorella. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.